2006, I was in a conversation with not just economists, but faculty members throughout the United States, maybe 45 on a listserv. The listserv dealt with 9/11. Why was I interested in 9/11? There was two factors, I think, principally behind my interest in 9/11. One was the fact that the United States government under George Bush had accused 19 people of engaging in a terrorist attack against the United States. And when I looked at the 9/11 Commission report, and I just read the accusations against the 19 people, there was not one shred of evidence presented against any of the 9/11, the 19 alleged hijackers. And that struck me. I mean, I was offended. I was offended by a sense of justice that if you're going to start wars or just simply accusing 19 people of doing something, you ought to present the evidence for it. What they were basically doing was assuming the conclusion. The conclusion was they did it, and therefore we'll go on from there. But there was another reason why I was involved with the 9/11, and that is because I'm an economist. I have a background in econometrics, and insider trading was one of the issues that was right in the American media for about 1 month after 9/11. So, after this, after a certain period of time among this discussion, one of the people who was a physicist, actually only an instructor in physics at the University of California at Berkeley, started talking about the upcoming disaster in the financial markets. And I have no problem talking about disasters or whatever, but the idea that he would be able to predict that a financial disaster was on the horizon in the United States, well, I just didn't accept it. I said, well, yeah, there may be a disaster coming up, but it may be in 30 years, and it may be tomorrow. It isn't just a question of saying that it's going to happen, but proving it's going to happen. That led me to something that I realized more and more over the last several years, and that is there are lots of economists out there, and almost nobody predicted, almost nobody, I'm not saying nobody, almost nobody predicted the financial crisis that began in late 2007 and went to hit bottom in March of 2009 and then started to go upward to some extent since then. I'll repeat it. Nobody was predicting it. In my profession, now what's wrong, okay? And that led to the issue for me of, well, is it really true that nobody predicted? And the answer is no. There are people who did predict it, but how do you know which person to look at right now? How do you know what economist to look at to figure out where we're going in the future? Somebody out there has got it right, but how do you know which person has got it right? And even the person who got it right last time may not have it right next time, okay? First of all, I don't have an answer to that. I don't have an answer to that question. I'm not great at predictions myself. So anyway, what do I look for to predict? One of the things I look for is whether the economist is being paid by he's making money off whatever he or she's doing, off the predictions. The second thing is whether the person is embedded in the media or directly connected to the media and therefore can't get through and say the truth, or on the other hand is genuinely independent of the media and actually can't get through the media. So I have on the screen now what the consolidation that's been going on in the media from 1983 to this is 2011. There's some change in the list of who is now in control of the media, but there's only 6 companies that are in control of 90% of the media. And one of the messages I want to make here is that I'm going to be talking about how things are moving, not just how the static is. So the movement here is increasing consolidation. And one of the points I'm making now is that it's even if you have somebody who's got the right answer, it's difficult for that person to crack through if the media doesn't want that person to crack through. and tell us where we're going. Okay, so that's the second factor. Third factor is on the other side of the issue, and that is we don't know exactly the role of the internet. I mean, I don't have a good feel about whether the internet's in the future going to be something that's very positive or not so positive. I just don't know. And one other thing I want to say is that even if you have a consolidated media, one should not make too strong of judgments about it. For example, in Venezuela right now, the press here may tell you the media is controlled, but it's not. I mean, the media in Venezuela is almost totally private. The government only has one station. Most of the media in Venezuela is in opposition to the government, and yet in 1 week from now you're going to find that the government's going to win another election, as it has in the last 4 or 5 elections. So people can think for themselves, even in circumstances where the media is consolidated. So where does that take me? So now I'm going to look at some of the factors that are behind the problems in the U.S. economy. Now I'm going to have a problem here because I have to, some of these things I couldn't get on the screen, so I'll just have to open them up. The first one here is the pattern of wages and productivity in the United States from 1947. You can't quite see that's 1947 perhaps, but 1947 up until close to the present. What's astonishing about this figure is that productivity has continued to go up until recently, and yet wages have stagnated on a weekly basis, including benefits, from about 1973, 75, something like that. How is that possible? How is it possible that workers on an hourly basis are producing more and more goods, and yet the wages of the workers are not going up on a weekly, hourly basis, or whatever? Karl Marx had an answer to that. Karl Marx's answer to that question is embedded in his theory of surplus value. The theory of surplus value says, I look at how many hours I work. I'm an average worker. I look at how many hours I work. I look at how many goods my wages can buy, and then look at the time required to make those goods. Let me say it again. The number of hours you work, compare that to the number of hours that are required to produce the goods you can consume with your wages. Marx's theory says, basically, in one of its aspects, that capitalists don't care at all about having technological change for the benefit of people or workers, but for increasing profits, which is for increasing the difference between the amount of hours workers work and what they get back. So all that figure from 1973 onward is no problem. I mean, it's fully consistent with what Marx is saying. The problem might be, well, why, since from World War II up until about 1973, did that track? And that will require us to talk about what happened immediately after World War II, and basically it's beyond the talk that I can do today. So one factor here is to try and explain what is going on here, and that's going to be connected to something else, which has nothing much to do with Marx, and that is another possible interpretation of what's the ominous factors in the American economy, and this has its origins in Keynes. Keynes said, basically, that there's ordinary people spend the money they get just for life purposes. And the other major actor is business firms or capitalists. And their primary determination about whether they're going to do investment or not, which is what's going to drive the economy forward or not, is their expectations about the future. And we don't know their expectations about the future. We can ask them, but their expectations can change substantially over time, like exactly what happened in 2009. Expectations are not foreseeable. You can't predict what's going to happen 10 years from now. And for Keynes, that is absolutely decisive much more than, for example, things like what the level of the interest rate is. So Keynes is basically saying, in this interpretation, that the United States has an ominous future because the base of consumption has to be ordinary people, if you want to call them workers, okay, has to be ordinary people, but the base of their consumption is flat while the productivity is going up. So where is the increasing output going to find an outlet? Where are you going to find markets? Now let me go to the next screen here. I'll have to, let me make a note here. Economists talk about supply and demand all the time. The implication, for example, this diagram is that we should be at full employment as soon as wages go down. That's what economists usually say. But economists almost always don't emphasize enough that for the labor market, that demand curve is dependent upon incomes. So if businesses don't face adequate demand for the products because people aren't spending, then that curve, the demand curve, is going to be shifting to the left. And that's I think one of the basic arguments Keynes is making. Let me go on to my next slide here, and that is about healthcare costs in the United States. These numbers maybe you're already sensitive to, but just look at the disastrous level of healthcare costs in the United States compared to any other country in the world. I like the lower figure more than the upper figure. It looks at healthcare expenditures per capita. That's being done on a purchasing power basis, and you'll see that the United States is way above any other country, and the level the level of the private portion is higher than any other country in proportion. But also, even if the United States stayed at its public level of expenditures for health coverage, we would be at about where France is. And if you look at where France is in terms of, for example, longevity of the population, it's as good as the United States, plus or minus. So where is all that other money going to? I mean, there's a long discussion about that. Ralph Nader thinks that, for example, a single-payer system is the way to go because you reduce a whole level of administrative costs that are being borne in the United States from not having a single-payer system. I remind you about the single-payer system here is that some Republican governors are opposing the Affordable Care Act by refusing to participate in the Medicare program, expansion of the Medicare program. But what in fact is happening is that the insurance companies are going to these governors and pushing the governors to get on board because they are going to make more money off the Obamacare program. That's one of the arguments that Ralph Nader has been trying to get people to be sensitive. I personally don't think we're going to go anywhere in terms of these kinds of figures with the Affordable Care Act. Now, let me go to the last item I want to make about where I was going to do a video about the wealth distribution in the United States. It's far worse than you'd expect, but I don't think I have enough time. I just want to do some quick figures here about military expenditures. In case you're not aware of it, the United States has almost one-half of its one-half of its total federal budget is based upon military concerns. Second is you compare the United States to the rest of the world. In these figures here, we have about 41% of total military expenditures at the world level. I mean, we're relatively speaking, we're kind of a small country. I mean, if you compare China and India, okay? And yet we're doing 41% of the military expenditures. Now, even that isn't quite as surprising as the last thing I just want to show on the screen here, and that's something from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientist. I want you to look at the bolded phrase from this statement here. the United States has something like 1,000 military bases of small magnitudes or big magnitudes somewhere around the world. And if you go to comparing that to other countries, and that's where the bolded sentence is, we have 95% of all foreign military bases in any country is the U.S. base in some country. I mean, for me, that's astonishing. Why do we think we have the right to have 95% of all foreign military bases around the world being American military bases? Now, I do have time for this last thing, which takes just a minute and 30
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart.
Okay, I made my point there. We have 5 seconds. Thank you very much.